Aloha! Welcome everybody to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum Education Webinar Series, where we discover and investigate a range of topics including aviation, aeronautics innovations, World War II Pacific Theater history, and much, much more. My name is William Spincola. I am the Senior Education Manager here at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, and I'll be your moderator today. We are joined by an exceptionally special guest speaker, Ms. Christina Olds, daughter of World War II and Vietnam War veteran and fighter pilot ace Robin Olds, whom we will be getting to know much better in just a moment. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Our museum is located in the state of Hawaii on historic Ford Island, right in the center of the very historic Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu. It is our museum's mission to steward the history of America's first aviation battlefield of World War II. Today's topic is Robin Olds, a legendary fighter pilot in his own right and a renowned military leader and air power thinker. One of my personal heroes, by the way, and I think I share that with our very special guest, Christina. I'm so excited to have you with us today. Aloha and welcome. Let's get started.
Well, aloha, everybody. I am somebody who absolutely loves the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum and have enjoyed many, many visits over the years there. And what you all should know is that my dad was born right there at Luke Field in 1922 when his father, Major at that time, Robert Olds, was commanding an observation squadron there. So lots of history. I think of myself as Kama'aina, as a very a definite part of Hawaii. So what I'd like to do is kind of take you through the military portion and the retirement years of my dad. We're not going to go into my grandfather's story or much of Robin's childhood because that's kind of a whole other hour. So maybe we'll look forward to that at another time.
Part two.
So what you're going to see on the screen is the slides from my regular PowerPoint presentation that I've given almost 400 times in different places around the world in different sort of edited forms. And because I am not in control of the computer there, that is Spin, I do not have my finger on the remote button. It will be Spin, and I will be telling him to advance the slides by saying next. So let's get started. Next. My dad went over to England in May of 1944, about 3 weeks before D-Day. He had just finished training with his squadron at Lomita Field, which is now Zamperini Field in Southern California. And they all trained in P-38s. The 434th Fighter Squadron was born during that time. When they went over to England, they were stationed at Wattisham and immediately started flying. He flew 3 different missions on D-Day and told me that it was an incredible experience to fly over the channel and see thousands of boats as far as the eye could see, stretched in every direction. And but his job during that day was to patrol the beaches back and forth, parallel to the beaches, and their job was to shoot down any Luftwaffe in case the Luftwaffe came up and tried to stop the invasion. No German planes came up that day, much to my father's chagrin, but it also was hard on him, who wanted to get into combat very quickly, but it was harder on him because as they were paralleling the beach, he told me that they could see the whites of the Germans' eyes that were firing down on the boys as they were getting out of their landing craft on the beach. And it was quite a, he said he had nightmares for quite a long time about, wishing they had been able to attack the gunners on the top of the cliffs. So this photo shows what happened after the squadron commander of the 434th ended his command. And young Robin Olds, sitting there in the middle on the bottom, 22 years old and a major, assumed the command of the squadron at that age. Now, interestingly enough, he had kept a handwritten diary starting in training back in Lomita Field and kept writing it all the way through to about February of 1945. which is when he took command of the squadron. And at that point, his handwritten diary stopped. And I coincidentally found the rest of that diary in the form of his official squadron logs 5 years ago here in Boise, Idaho, where I live at the Warhawk Aviation Museum. It was stunning to find that somebody had copied all of the squadron logs that my dad kept formally. So I have all of those World War II writings all in one place now, which is a thrill for me. Okay, next. There is young Major Robin Olds. He doesn't look more than 18 years old there, does he?
But he's tall.
Next. So right after World War II, okay, so this is, you need to understand, this is sort of a truncated version of my big PowerPoint show, and I go on automatic thinking of what the next slide is. So I might occasionally be surprised. So what I want to tell you before talking about this P-80 is that Robin shot down 13 air-to-air aircraft, German aircraft during World War II, and destroyed another 11 and a half on the ground. So he came away as an ace in World War II. He came back to the United States, and his very first assignment was as assistant football coach at West Point, from which he had graduated on June 1st, 1943. Well, he wasn't very happy with that assignment, so he worked his magic with the people he knew in the Pentagon and asked to be sent out to California to fly the new jets. And the new jets are here, the P-80, as you see. And he flew out of March Air Force Base. You will notice there's some writing on the nose there. It says SCAT and then the Roman numeral 10. The story about that is every single aircraft that my dad flew starting in World War II was named SCAT 1 through SCAT 27. And that's because his roommate at West Point was named Scat Davis. And Scat really wanted to fly, but he washed out of pilot training because he was colorblind. And my dad told him, don't worry, I'm going to take you flying with me my whole career. And that's why he called every aircraft Scat. The interesting thing is that right here, this photo of the P-80 was in, I believe, 1946 out at Lomita, and our Army Air Corps hadn't turned officially into our new Air Force until the following year, 1947. But by around this time, because of all the amazing nose art that existed on World War II aircraft, the Department of Defense put out the order that nobody was allowed to name their aircraft anymore. No one was allowed to have official nose art on any of the fuselages. It just was not going to be. So my dad got around that by going out with his own little can of paint and painting SCAT 10 on this P-80 in Robin Olds style. All right, next. This is his team that were flying the P-80s. And this really is kind of the start, the birth of our Air Force Thunderbirds. It's the very first aerobatic team flown by the official Air Force. And what they would do is they would barnstorm back and forth across the country, landing at little airfields on dirt strips, landing in Oklahoma and in Tennessee and on to the East Coast, and then turning around and flying back. Well, you can imagine in those days, if nobody had heard a jet engine, let alone had seen a jet flying overhead, that what a stir it was. But it was all part of the Department of Defense's public relations aim to, in peacetime, now that World War II was over, to toot the horn of our new Air Force and how important air power was, along with the Army and the Navy and the Coast Guard, that our Air Force was a absolutely legitimate force to be reckoned with and admired. All right, next. And that's another really wonderful shot of my dad, who was 6'2" and broad-shouldered, football player, skier, ultimate athlete, very, very, very handsome and elegant man, in my opinion only, of course. Next. While he was at March Air Force Base, he looked up this young actress whom he had watched in movies in Quonset huts in England during World War II. And he found out that one of the guys in his squadron was dating her stand-in. And so he worked out a double date with Ella Raines, and they met in late 1946. She was dating Clark Gable at the time, which is amazing. And she met Robin Olds. Okay, next photo. She had just filmed Tall in the Saddle with John Wayne. Next. Oh, okay. Missing a slide, but that's okay. So she broke up with Clark Gable within a week and got engaged to Robin, and they were married 9 months later in February of 1947. Before the wedding, he did tell her, now look, Ella, you need to understand one thing. I am a fighter pilot, and I'm always going to be a fighter pilot. It's the only thing I will ever be. And I want you to keep on acting whenever you want, wherever we're living. If you have to go back to California, that's fine. But just please understand that I am a fighter pilot, and it comes with quite a responsibility to stay being a fighter pilot. And you might have to get used to that. Is that okay? And she said yes. Right, next. So their first assignment after they were married was back to England, to Tangmere. And my dad had been invited to be the guest commander as an American, which was astonishing, to RAF Squadron 1. And it was a year that he absolutely adored. And to this day, RAF Squadron 1 idolizes him. I've been with my daughter to visit their base at Lossiemouth in Scotland, and they have the Robin Olds bar in their hangar above all the aircraft, and they have a special room in their club devoted to everything Robin Olds, including photographs and a gigantic diary scrapbook that takes up the middle of an oak table that everyone can look through. So it's just really a joy to see how his legacy continues in the RAF as well as in our own American Air Force. Next. After this assignment, he went briefly to Washington, D.C., and then was assigned as a base commander at Pittsburgh while my mother was filming a TV show in New York. She had an apartment in the Carlisle Hotel. I was born there in New York City in 1952. I'm the one with hair. And my little sister was born 14 months later. Next. Right after this, he was sent back over to Europe. First of all, it was to Germany. And my mother took a house in London where she filmed her last two movies during this time. And then after Germany, my dad was sent down to Wheelus Air Force Base in North Africa, in Libya. And his job was to set up the desert range, the gunnery range, weapons practice range, where all the pilots who were with the Air Force in Europe would come down and practice shooting and target practice out in the desert. Next. It's another shot of the aircraft there. I don't have really any more photos from our time in Libya, which is a shame. So I always put out the call to anybody who's watching the presentation. If you know anybody, or if you have any photographs of that time in Libya, it'd be 1956 to 1958. Please let me know. I'd love to add them to my presentation. Next. Then while he was there in Libya, he got the word that he was going to be sent to the Pentagon. And this is my dad's drawing of what it felt like to be sent away from flying and back to Washington, D.C. to the Pentagon. Boy. So
yeah, we all feel that.
Off we went back to Washington, D.C. Next. And while in Washington, D.C., he was in the Pentagon for 4 years and then at the War College for a year after that. Then he was sent back to England, which we were so excited about, especially my sister and I was 11, my sister was 10, and we were already Beatles fans, which was 1963. And oh my gosh, that's all we cared about. But obviously, my dad had a much bigger interest. So he became the commander of the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing in Bentwaters, England. And it was actually a twin base, Bentwaters Woodbridge, flying the 101 Voodoo. And his job during this time, which really surprised me when I found out what it was, because I remember growing up with him when I was old enough to understand what he was doing in Washington, D.C., he would be grumbling all the time about the War College and what was happening in the Pentagon as far as the Cold War. And the Cold War was all about nuclear weapons, which my dad just thought was the stupidest idea anybody had ever had. And he really was not happy about the fact that the world was living at the point where we all had to point missiles at each other in order to not fire missiles at each other. So I found out while I was writing the book that his job here at Bentwaters, this photograph you see, was to lead the mission to drop the atomic bomb on Russia if his red phone rang in his office in the house. So that knowledge really stunned me because I remembered him talking about it, how much he disliked and disapproved of nuclear weapons. But to know that he obeyed his orders and he took his command very, very seriously, with that his mission with this wing would be to go drop the bomb on Russia, really stunned me and really let me know the degree of loyalty and seriousness with which he took his role in the Air Force. Also, I was told by a few of the guys who flew with him here at Bentwaters that he told them that he would be the one to go first. That he always had a 101 loaded and ready to go, and he would be the one to go first. So that's very Robin Olds of him to have done that. So here he is addressing his group on the flight line. And also during this time, this was about 1965 here, early 65, I think March. And of course, you all know what happened during that time. The Vietnam War had started. And my dad wanted to get back to combat flying more than anything. At this point, he was on the list to get his first star as a brigadier general, which he did not want to be. He was also on the list to be sent back to the Pentagon, where they wanted him to train to be on the staff of the combat staff. Why am I losing it? Our Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sorry about that. But he did not want that. He did not want that at all. And so what he decided to do was he had to figure out a way to get to Vietnam. And the way he did that was to get 3 of his favorite pilots together. Next slide. Here they are. And start practicing for an open house air show that was going to happen at Bentwaters. And he was going to show these people on the ground exactly what the 101 could do. Now, the 101, for those of you who know, isn't very aerodynamically capable of pulling a lot of aerobatics, but he and his guys figured out how to put on one whale of an air show. Next slide. And it's hard to see, but there are actually 6 101s in this photo, cleverly disguised against the patchwork of the English countryside. Next. So I was on the ground that day at Bentwaters, all of 13 years old, and I will never forget it because out of the clear sky came the roar of jets, and these 4 jets came flying across the runway and then turned around and came back, and they went up in a bomb burst, and then they came back and they flew in inverted over the runway and did a bunch of maneuvers that just stunned the crowd. Well, that day, that night, my dad was hauled into his commanding general's office and stood at attention in front of his desk. And that commanding general said, "You are never going to be a general." And he ripped up his promotion papers right in front of him and threw them on the ground. "And you are exactly the kind of disreputable young officer we're just going to ship off to Southeast Asia." And my dad said, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Turned on his heel and walked out. And that's how Robin Olds got sent to Vietnam. He did not want to be a general, that's for sure. So in late September of 1966, Robin Olds found his way to Vietnam. Next. And he arrived. Here he is meeting his, I think this is the colonel he replaced, and also a Thai officer. The base was Ubon in Thailand. And my dad arrived to a very disgruntled group of pilots. The whole Southeast Asia theater was in turmoil and in shambles. because the missions were being planned on the desks in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon and in the White House, with no real regard for what was really happening over there in the theater. And so the pilots were unhappy. The bases were fighting with each other. Nobody was trusting the intel. There was really, really low morale. And he walked into the first briefing, strode to the front of the room with all the young pilots in the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing sitting there in their flight suits looking very bored. And they see this old guy with gray hair striding to the front of the room. And you can imagine what was going through their heads. Their previous commander, I believe, had only flown like 3 missions, something like that. And here was another full bird colonel, old guy, who was going to come in and tell them what to do. Well, he certainly did tell them what to do. He stood up in front of his men and said, "I am here for you to teach me, and you are going to teach me well all of the planning and all of the routes over North Vietnam, and because I am going to be leading you within 3 weeks." And one of the guys sitting in the audience said, "Yeah, right." And my dad looked at him and said, "And you are going to be my wingman." And that was Colonel J.B. Stone, who to this day is still a very, very good friend of mine. So Robin set about changing the tactics. And he decided that the way to change the tactics was to get a hands-on view of everything that was going on in the theater over there. And the way to really put the North Vietnamese Air Force back on its heel. Oh, sorry, you changed it.
Sorry.
Chappie James. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. We're good.
So Chappie James, who had been my dad's vice wing commander in England, came over and was his vice wing commander at Ubon too. Daddy had called him in. Chappie was never known to be a great fighter pilot, but he was a great people person. So the two of them together had the whole balance of the wing beautifully in hand. So during this time, my dad and J.B. Stone put their heads together and came up with what became known as Operation Bolo. The job was to get the MiGs to come up after the F-4s, because the MiGs, if North Vietnamese knew that the F-4s were up, they wouldn't come up and fight them, but they would come up and knock down the F-105s and definitely knock down the bombers. So it was a cat and mouse game of trying to lure the MiGs up. My dad and J.B. Stone decided that the way to do this was to disguise the F-4s as if they were 105s. So they set about changing a lot of the parameters around how the F-4s normally flew. They turned it in how the 105s normally flew. They changed all the call signs. They changed the radar settings. They changed the armament on the planes. They changed everything in a very secret build up to this plan that had to be put in front of the 7th Air Force to get approved. Next slide. Let's see if I have that one in there. Yeah, so this is where he's planning, introducing the Operation Bolo plan to 7th Air Force Command, because it involved so many different units in Southeast Asia because of the support that was needed, the tankers that would have to support them. There were flights of other F-4s that were going to come up from other bases in case they were needed. So on the morning of January 2nd, 1967, my dad took off leading the first flight of 4 F-4s. 4 flights flew out of Ubon, and it was a very cloudy day, and they flew north, hoping that the MiGs would come up through the overcast, and sure enough, they did. And my dad told me it was just a hell of a fight. For 10 minutes, they knocked down 7 MiGs in 10 minutes, and he got his first MiG that day. Next slide. So this is when he landed after Operation Bolo, and of course the word had spread back to Ubon that it was a completely successful mission. During the next week, another flight went up and got another 3 MiGs. So at this time, after this series of events, the North Vietnamese didn't come back up with MiGs until March or April. It was basically 1/3 of the entire Air Force of the North Vietnamese. Next. And this is right after Bolo when he climbed down from his aircraft. Next. And that's J.B. Stone, young Major J.B. Stone at that time. And they just were really, really celebrating the success of this operation that two of them had planned together. Next. And there he is debriefing his commanding officer, I believe that's General White, who flew up to be with them from 7th Air Force. Next. You know, JB had already changed into his black party suit, and my dad was still in his sweaty flight suit with his G suit and everything still attached. But there ensued one whale of a party. Next. Right after Operation Bolo, my dad decided to start growing a mustache. He was inspired by the commander of the base commander of RAF Squadron 1, Tommy Burns, back in England in 1946, 1947, 1948. So he started growing this mustache. And this is about, I don't know, you guys tell me, what, 3 weeks old, maybe?
Yeah.
And he grew this mustache and he grew it and he grew it. And pretty soon the Pentagon was saying, shave it off. It's out of rags. You're a bad influence. Shave it off. But no, my dad didn't shave it off. Next. He started growing this mustache and it grew and it grew and it grew. Next. Go back to that one. Spin. So the mustache became known as Robin Olds' single-digit salute to Washington, D.C. And to this day, this mustache is honored by a mustache march
Mustache
all,
March in the Air Force. Yep.
all across the world, Air Force bases. Both retired and active duty pilots will grow their mustaches starting on the 1st of March and grow them all the way through till the 31st of March, and then have a big competition. I have been honored, if that's the word, to judge several of these contests at different bases. And it's really, really fun to see how many guys really try to go out of limits now, which because the limits are not past the corner of your mouth or over the vermilion of your lip. So this mustache actually has its own Wikipedia page. And when you go online and just enter Mustache March, it'll come up as an entire big Wikipedia page about it. All right, next. My dad was really loved by his ground crews. Every year when I can, I go attend the UBAN vets reunions in different places around the country. And these guys tell me how much that they loved the fact that he would come out to the flight line and sit down and talk to them in the middle of the night, often bringing a 6-pack of beer. He'd ask where they were from, if they were having any problems with anything, and he told them, please come to me if you need anything. If there's anything that needs to be done that's not getting done, you can come right to me. Just march right in my office. And so these guys that flew with him or worked on the aircraft that flew just absolutely adored him. He is a leader, a personable leader, the kind of leader we really need in the Air Force and all through the military. And it's why he was just so respected, I think even more so for his leadership abilities than his stunning abilities as a tactical pilot. Next slide. I love this photo. The first time I'd seen it was 2 years ago when somebody sent it to me out of their found film. He's just out on the flight line watching the aircraft getting ready to take off, solemn, watching his guys. Next. My dad was also a great jokester. This was a monkey that had belonged to Lance Saijan, who had been shot down. And the monkey came to live with Robin in his trailer at Uban. Of course, it was in a cage. But what he loved to do was when his guys were out flying missions, my dad would put this monkey in their rooms. So when guys came, and they were very, very destructive little creatures. And so when the guys came back from flying, they would find their flight suits in tatters and excrement streamed on the walls and just an absolute horrible mess. Next slide. He loved taking that monkey into the officers' club as well and letting it loose to run up and down the tables and put its fists in everyone's drinks and steal the peanuts. Well, one day when he was out on a mission, two of his guys got the monkey out of its locked cage and put him in Robin's trailer. So when Robin came back, he walked into the same sort of destruction that his guys had experienced. And so that monkey ended up being given to the base fire brigade and lived its life out as a mascot down in the fire department. Next. Here he is giving an impromptu staff meeting with Chappie and more of the guys on the hood of his staff car. Next. And my dad was always in the planning room. He was always hands-on with all of the missions. He wasn't going to let them be ordered by anybody in Washington. He versed himself in all the little details, all of the intel, all of the weather reports, all of the statistics that came in from the other bases so that they could plan the most effective and the safest missions possible. Next. Here he is going out for one of those flights. Next. And oh, his group, Satan's Angels, I actually have that banner in my garage right here. It was given to me by the UBAN vets. And they are grouped here on F4 number 829. This is actually SCAT 27. Next. That is now in the Air Force Museum, and you'll see that picture in a minute. So he shot down a total of 4 MiGs. The first one was January 2nd. The second one was on May the 2nd, and then he got 2 on May 20th. And this is after the May 20th mission. Next. Celebrating with the whole crew. Next. Once Bolo happened, the press was swarming UBAN all the time because the news of Bolo had hit all the airwaves in the United States, and to the point where Robin had become so famous that the Pentagon told him very sternly, "You may not lead any more missions over North Vietnam," because they were afraid he'd get shot down, of course. And in those days, a quite large bounty of $25,000 was on his head for the North Vietnamese or the Russian pilots who were flying for them to shoot down and capture Robin Olds. But my dad, of course, obeyed orders in the only way he could obey orders, which was to obey orders, but not obey the orders. And so he did not lead any more missions. He flew as number 3 or as number 4. And then he gave away as many as he could. When he sighted a MiG, he would let his wingmen know, or pilots in the other flights, to get this MiG. Because he did not want to be sent home. Once you get 5, you become an ace and you get sent home to parades and all kinds of news. And he did not want to leave his guys. He did not want to leave the combat zone until he could get all of his men safely home and help to end the war itself. So he started just giving away the MiGs. We do know he did get number 5. It was never reported. It was told to me by the person who observed it from 105, but we have never tried to get it confirmed because my dad would never want it to be confirmed. So that's just what it is. People have come up to me and say, "We know he got 7, or we know he got 10. Well, that's really not possible. There are just too many eyes that you'd have to fool and too many ears you'd have to shut to stop the rumors like that. Next. Here he is with one of his great guys. Oh, the one right to his right, left, as you're looking at the screen, that's Bill Kirk. He was one of the original pilots in that 81st TAC Fighter Wing aerobatic demonstration in England. And Robin gathered him up and another of the guys right away as quickly as he could to come over to be with him at UBAN. Next. There he is painting another star for a MiG kill on the F4. Next. This is a wonderful lithograph by Robert Taylor, the amazing aviation artist. It's called Phantom Strike. It was a strike, a low-level strike on a blast furnace mill in North Vietnam. And my dad's jet took on quite a hit during this time. A hole was blown through his wing and leaking fuel all the way back to Ubon, to the point where he landed basically bingo when he got back to Ubon, but he made it safely. I love this litho. Next. There he is standing in front of Scat 27, old war-torn, battle-damaged Scat 27. After the war, it was sent to an Army depot in the States, and then the Air Force Museum got hold of it and called him up and said, we want to put your F4 in the museum, and it was going to be repainted in all of its glory before all these battle scars. So next. This is what it is in the Air Force Museum. It's actually a stunning display. Anybody who's seen it knows what I'm talking about. If you've never been to the Air Force Museum, you must. It's actually the best aviation museum in the world. I've seen a few of them, and I do think we have the best museum. England's number 2. Well, they'll say they're number 1, but I say they're number 2. Next. Here he is sitting in a cockpit getting ready to go out on a flight. Next. And with his guys again, and of course, you're not supposed to sit in the engine intake. Great place to pose for a photo like that. Next. Going to put another star up on the clubhouse. Next. And here he is meeting again with a Thai official right toward the end of his 1-year tour there. Next. So right now, what I'm going to do is I am just going to tell Spin next. Don't do it yet. Because the following few slides are of his last day, his last flight, his final mission out of Ubon. He was about to get sent stateside. He knew he was going to be the commandant of cadets at the Air Force Academy, and he was leaving his men and leaving his combat command. And you can just imagine what was going through his mind this day in his final mission. So I'm going to let these slides scroll by without any commentary from me. Next. 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 Here he is headed out. Next. 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 The old man, the end of his last mission. Next. Climbing down out of his cockpit, met by all his men. Next. This is the quintessential sort of portrait of Robin Olds during his time in Vietnam, and the way people think of him with that massive mustache. Next. And then he was picked up and carried on the shoulders of his guys into the officers' club. My dad told me this was the proudest moment of his life, that his young men, his first and second lieutenants and captains and young majors were carrying him. And that is why I decided to have this photograph be the cover of the book. And I have the original huge black and white photo of this that my dad had over his fireplace. It's in my living room. Next. So they went into the club and there ensued a massive party. Next. And there's a famous Robin Olds finger. He's either about to tell a joke or tell everyone to be quiet now and listen to me. And I wear his ring. I had it sized down 3 sizes after he passed away, and I wear it all the time. Next. And then he gave his final speech to the 8th Fighter Wing from the steps of the club. Next. And then they gave him a parade around the base. Next. His final photo from there. Next. And then he flew back to Washington, D.C., where we met him at Andrews Air Force Base. I believe it was about the 2nd of October. And he was hauled into the White House right away to meet with LBJ. And LBJ, and my dad, to his credit, said, you know, to his credit, LBJ was very dignified and very good to speak with about this. He listened to me and he understood what I was saying, but it was not a happy time for Robin. And at this point, LBJ was saying, so, Colonel, tell me how you think it's going over there. And my dad said, sir, with all due respect to you as my commander-in-chief, get us the hell out of this goddamn war. And Johnson said, well, son, how do you expect me to do that? And Robin said, it's simple, just win it. Because they could have won it at that time, but they weren't allowed to. Next. They met for about half an hour, so I'm told. Next. And then the next day, this cartoon appeared in newspapers around the country of LBJ holding his fainting press agent, official Vietnam line, and Robin Olds saying, it's simple, the way to end the war is to win it. Next. And here he is debriefing the chiefs of staff and a whole bunch of senators in this room over at the Pentagon right after he met with LBJ. And Robin was not a happy camper during this meeting. And a lot of this video is shown in front of the F4 at the Air Force Museum. So you can stand there and listen to it. And he's very stern and he's very unhappy at how the war is being handled out of Washington, D.C. And that there was just no way they could win it if they weren't allowed to mine the harbors, or if they weren't allowed to attack the supply lines, or if they weren't allowed to go in and attack the bases in North Vietnam. But of course, Johnson held back on that because it would be very, very upsetting, shall we say, to the Chinese and the Russians at that time. So the war dragged on. This is 1967, October here. Next. So he was ordered to shave off his mustache because he was going to go to the Air Force Academy as Commandant of Cadets. But when he got there, the astonishing thing was, it was end of October. He had taken almost a month off, and we drove slowly across country in 2 cars. He got to his job that day, and he was met by all the cadets wearing fake mustaches. And they had also painted 4 stars on his office chair to signify the fact that he'd be flying this desk for the next 4 years and not an F4. And to my dad's great astonishment, very quickly, he realized how much he loved this assignment. Next. Because it was back with the youngsters, the gung-ho kids that were there to be trained and there to get an education and become officers of the Air Force. So he went out and he would train with them in Jacks Valley, which is where they did all their wilderness training and camping out and marching with full packs and running with combat boots on. And he joined them every day to let them know that he was with them. And if he could do all this, they certainly could do it and do it a lot better. Next. So while he was at the Air Force Academy, Chappie James would come and they would serenade. They had beautiful singing voices, both of them, and they would serenade the dining-ins for the various classes as they were graduating. And I believe it was right before this one that Chappie was at Davis-Monthan at that time, and he was flying F4s. And he decided to fly an F4 up to Peterson Field in Colorado Springs to come to this Air Force Academy class dinner. Robin found out that Chappie had gotten hold of an F4 and was going to fly over the Air Force Academy. So Robin got into an F4 as well and flew over the Air Force Academy. And there ensued the damnedest aerial battle over the United States Air Force Academy that anyone has ever seen. And they still talk about it. Next. He also did a lot of traveling around the country, speaking to civilian groups. And basically it was to tell them, we were right in the middle of the Vietnam War protests. And he was trying to tell people, look, don't hate the military. We're doing our jobs. We're doing what we were told to do. You need to direct your anger at Washington, D.C. and your politicians and the people who are in D.C. They're the ones running this war. Stop blaming the military. Every person who was part of the military during those years, remember how terrible it was coming home. There's absolutely no respect paid to them during that time. It was terrible. Next. But he did have to become a general at last. Commandant of the cadets, earned the title of Brigadier General. So he pinned on his first star in, I believe it was in November of 1968. Next. And I do love this photo. This is the day he was also awarded the Air Force Cross. Next. After the Air Force Academy, he left there in February of 1971, and he was assigned as Inspector General of the Air Force down at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. And he was not happy about this because his job was to go around the world and inspect the safety readiness of our different bases and basically report back to the Pentagon. And I have a pile of those reports that are quite interesting. They're so heavily redacted. And I just like to think about all my dad's swear words, probably every other sentence in those reports. At the end of it, Vietnam was still going on in 1973, and he begged to be let go back and be a combat commander and help end the war and get his guys home safely. But they said, no, you're never going to fly again. You're never going back to combat. So he retired. He retired 30 years to the day he had graduated from West Point, and moved up into the mountains of Colorado to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, which he had discovered while at the academy. He ended up living the rest of his days, 35 more years up in Steamboat. And this photograph was taken in Christmas of 1973. So he quickly grew his mustache back and kept it for about 2 years, but then just got sick of it, because when you're a skier and you've got a big mustache, those of you who ski know the cold air makes your snot come down and it freezes into icicles in your mustache. And it just became too much of a problem. So he finally shaved it off. But I love this photo. Next. And he became known as the old man of the mountain, very much the public beloved figure in Steamboat Springs. Next. Got back into riding horses like he used to all the time. Next. He was a great skier, just a phenomenal downhill skier, and loved deep powder more than anything. Next. And he and his buddies would ski all over Colorado and Wyoming, and also go over to Switzerland and Germany and ski as much as they could. Next. And I took this photo of him. He was tucking into a 25-inch rainbow. Very happy about that. Next. And then what he decided he had to do was get back out into the world and be with his guys. He just wanted to be around pilots all the time. And he started accepting every invitation that came to him to go to pilot graduations, to go to dining ins, to go to any kind of big event that was happening at fighter wings around the world, because he just wanted to be back with the boys. Next. And he also was very much a part of Air Force luminaries and aviation legends. And this is a wonderful photo. There's Robin on the far left. next to Colonel Bud Anderson, who's now Brigadier General Bud Anderson. Bud is still with us. He's 102. He is a great friend of mine, but he is still with us, just sharp as a tack, amazing man. Next to Bud is Jim Laurier, who is an outstanding aviation artist. Next to Jim is Gunther Rahl, and then Tex Hill, and at the end, Chuck Yeager. But I want to tell you about Gunther Rahl. Gunther Rahl was a Luftwaffe pilot in World War II, and he and Robin met during one of these aviation events and fell into instant like with each other. They even discovered they had flown against each other in a battle during World War II. They became the best of friends. Gunther used to come to Steamboat and ski with Robin. Robin would go to Switzerland and Germany and ski with Gunther. And the day my dad died, when the phone rang in the house, the very first phone call I got was from Gunther Rahl in Germany, who said, "I will miss your father so much." That's the honor among fighter pilots, truly. Great friends to the end of their days. Next. And so Robin took off around to different bases, being invited everywhere, and everywhere he could, he would get sneaked onto a flight. Next. Here he is at T-28. I think this is at, somebody tell me, is it Holland? I don't recognize the RA.
Yeah, the Flash. I'm not familiar with the Flash.
No. So there's the old man in the middle, bald and gray and white haired, about to get into another flight. Next. And this is a gathering of Eagles, a great gathering of people. Tex Hill in the back, Joe Foss, Robin, Gabby Gabreski and Bob Hoover, and the gentleman on the right is Skip Lehman, who was the organizer, planned all of those get-togethers. And Bob Hoover was a friend of mine for quite a long, many years at the Oshkosh Air Show before he passed away in the last few years. Next. And this is when when SCAT 27 was installed at the Air Force Museum. Big party. Great fun. Next. And Robin singing. There's Bob Hoover behind him. Actually, Chuck Yeager is also in this photograph, but off to the right. And they're just serenading everybody with fighter pilot songs, the real lyrics, not the censored lyrics that the boys have to sing now. Next. So during this time, his World War II Mustang Scat 7 was found in pieces by a gentleman named Jim Shuttleworth in Indiana, who was loved to fly Mustangs and loved to renovate them. And he traced the serial number of Scat 7, found it had been flown by Robin Olds, called my dad up in Steamboat and said, "How would you like to fly your Mustang again?" And Robin said, "Well, of course I would." He said, "We're making it into a TF with a back seat as a trainer, and you can come fly it when I'm all done with it. But sir, you have to get your private pilot's license." Well, you can imagine how that went over. My dad said, "I don't need any goddamn pilot's license, private license." And Jim said, "I'm sorry, sir, but the FAA says you must have a private license." So Robin started training in a Cessna in Steamboat Springs, got his private license within 3 weeks. And I ran into many years later when I was on a book tour, a gentleman came up to the table where I was signing books, and he leaned over the table and said, "Christina, I was your dad's pilot instructor at Steamboat when he got his license, and I just want to tell you that I had to throw away a pair of pants." I don't know what my dad did in that Cessna, but I think I can bet I wasn't riding with him. So this is actually a photo of him in the Mustang Miss America at Reno races. Next. But there he is in Scat 7, flying over Indiana. He was a very happy boy that day. Next. Look at that grin. My dad did tell me that he stayed up in the cockpit for a long time. He didn't want to get out of it while he was being interviewed, and his hands were out of sight. He said, "Honey, I tried so hard to unscrew that clock or steal something out of that cockpit to take home. I never did get anything undone." Next. So there's Miss America on the right, the racing Mustang at Reno, and an F4 pulled up on the left. Next. In 2001, he was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Next. And that is General Robin Rand. Robin Rand was named after Robin Olds, and my dad met this youngster. He knew his parents when young Robin was 2 years old and bounced him on his knee. And Robin Rand went off into a brilliant career in the Air Force and is a very good friend of mine to this day. We think of each other as brother and sister in many ways. Next. And what my dad did after Vietnam and after the Air Force Academy and after he settled into Steamboat Springs was he started going back over to visit his 8th Fighter Wing. And the 8th Fighter Wing had moved from Uban up to Kunsan, South Korea in 1975. And Kunsan Air Base and Osan Air Base are two American air bases that are also with the ROK, the Republic of Korea fighter pilots who are all training together and fighting together to train against the North Korea. And so my dad started visiting them every year. And this base is the home of the Wolf Pack. To this day, the 8th Fighter Wing is the home of Robin Olds, and all of the jets have the Wolf Pack on the tail. Next. There's a Robin Olds room full of his memorabilia. Really fun place to visit. Next. When I went first over in 2015, we renamed the main avenue to Olds Avenue. Next. And there are the F-16s lined up with the Wolf Pack on their tails.
And we have one of these in our museum collection.
Oh, that's amazing. Can't wait to see it. Next. And the F-16 all loaded up and ready to go. Next. The Elephant Walk, a little deterrent to Kim Jong-un. I'm sure he is a bit deterred by this. Next. So every place my dad went in his later years, he would be surrounded by young pilots who just wanted to listen to his stories. Whenever we went to air shows together or aviation museums, I would lose track of him, but all I had to do was look for a big gathering of guys, a big circle. Several circumferences of pilots would gather around him and just listen to his stories. Next. Now here he is at Duxford in 2005, very graciously signing anything that was put in front of him. That was an amazing trip with him. And we also went to the Eagle Pub in Cambridge, where the guys during World War II, along with the RAF pilots they flew with, would sign their names on the ceiling with candle soot. They'd stand on each other's shoulders and sign their names on the ceiling. Next. And this is Colonel J.B. Stone with me and my dad. I moved back to Colorado in 2003. But I lived in Breckenridge while my dad was up in Steamboat because we would just party too much together if I lived in the same town. So 100 miles kept us safely apart. And I'd go up there once a month. And when he knew I was coming up, he'd call all his guys, "Hey, Chris is coming. She's going to cook." So I'd arrive and find myself cooking for 10 to 12 pilots who were sleeping in sleeping bags all over his house. It was a lot of fun. Next. And my daughter, Jennifer, who is Robin's only grandchild, had her first Mustang ride in 2005, not in Scat 6. This is a Mustang named for Scat 6, but it's a single-seater, so it didn't have a back seat. But she did have her first Mustang ride during this trip to Oshkosh. Next. And there's Robin holding my baby Jenny when she was 6 months old in Steamboat. And the next slide is him holding me at 6 months old. Same man, same loving father. What a wonderful dad he was, and grandpa. To the point that my daughter is with me now when I make speeches. We've judged mustache marches together. We're going to Langley Air Force Base together next month for a big visit. She has never been there, so I'm really looking forward to that. Next. There's Jenny making sure Grandpa's well covered with stickers on Christmas Eve. Next. And at his 75th birthday party. Next. And the last photo of the two of them together, this is July of 2006. Next. And so Jenny and I both have gone over to Belgium, where Scat 7 now lives in glory, and that we've each flown in Scat 7. And let me tell you what an experience it was for me to be in this Mustang flying over the lands of Belgium, knowing that, you know, from the air, the land looks basically the same as it must have during World War II. And I had my dad's ring on and I was holding it up against the window. And it was just such an amazingly emotional experience for both of us. Next. And then we pushed Scat 7 back into its hangar. Next. And this is the last photo of my sister and me with my dad on July the 4th of 2006. The photograph was taken by J.B. Stone's wife, Tommy Stone. And at this point, I should also tell you that unfortunately, my parents' marriage fell apart after 30 years. My mother had turned into quite a drinker when she gave up her movie career and was not happy about it. And so they endured as long as they could, but ended up separating after my sister and I were both out of the house. Next. In October of 2006, my dad was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. And I started going up to Steamboat every week for 2 or 3 days to look after him. And then by the end of that year, and by January 1st, I knew I had to move up there with him. So I moved in with him and was his only caregiver the last 6 months of his life. Next. It was an incredible time we had together during those last months, because he was acutely still fully there in his mind. His body wasn't working so well, but we had fighter pilots visiting from all over the world, and also letters and texts and emails flowed in from everywhere, thanking him for his service. And he was quite overwhelmed by this because he really thought that people didn't understand what he was trying to do in Vietnam. And he didn't understand that his legacy had reached far and wide, and had garnered a tremendous amount of respect. And during his last month, he told me he was really upset about how he hadn't written his book. And I told him, Daddy, I've always known I'd do your book for you. I watched pilots surround him at air shows and then turn to me and say, please make him write his stories. So he did do a few notes and a few pages here and there, but nothing cohesive. He did not want to sit in front of that computer. He wanted to be out with the boys. So I promised him I'd write the book, and he was really, really happy about that. He died very peacefully. We had fighter pilots in the house on June 14th, 2007. Next. And we had a funeral at the Air Force Academy. He was supposed to be buried at Arlington, but he did not want that. He told me a month before he passed away to be sure to not let him go to Arlington. He wanted to be at the Air Force Academy in his mountains and in Colorado. And this is the urn with his ashes that is buried at the Air Force Academy. Next. And you can always find his grave there because there are bottles. And there are nickels everywhere. And if you go visit, and it's very easy to see, just go in the north gate and go to the cemetery. Take a bottle with you in case there aren't any bottles left, or in case there's an empty, and make sure you drink a toast to Robin Olds. He will hear you. Next. And you can even find it in the wintertime, because just look for the bottles. Next. We had an incredible flyover during the cemetery part of the funeral. We had Mustangs flying over. We had an F-4 chasing a MiG. We had the Colorado National Guard. And then we had 4 F-4s that approached from the south. And the stunning thing is number 1 took off and headed up straight into the sun, not number 3 as is normal in missing man formations. And as E.T. Murphy, the young colonel who flew number 1, pulled up, next, he disappeared right into the sun, just went straight up until we lost sight of him. And behind me in the audience, seated in the cemetery, came an older man's voice saying, "My leader is gone. My lead is gone." Beautiful, beautiful ceremony commemorating my dad's passing. And I have his funeral flag right there behind me. And I got to work writing the book. Next. I was in the middle of writing the book in February of 2008, where a whole bunch of his fighter pilot buddies who were skiers and joined us in Steamboat flew up and joined me. And I put the last I had kept back a chunk of my dad's ashes because I wanted to put them in Steamboat. And I tromped out to the edge of one of his favorite runs and put his ashes out there. And when I turned around to come back up the hill, there were 60 pilots in their ski gear standing at attention, and immediately burst into song. And then, of course, out of all of our pockets came Jeremiah weed and tequila and whiskey, little shot glasses, and we toasted. And then we threw a bunch of nickels off this cliff. Throw a nickel on the grass, save a fighter pilot's ass, as they say. And what's so cool is ever since then, this group of pilots still get together at Steamboat. And if one of the group has passed away, their family members will send some of his ashes, and we'll do the same ceremony off of this point and send those ashes over the cliff, as well as a whole bunch of nickels. And then we'll sing fighter pilot songs and toast. And I can just imagine the archaeologists of the future and 5,000 years from now are never going to be able to figure out why there's a bunch of
Those coins are there.
nickels in the base of this cliff. Next. So right around May of 2008, I was right in the middle of writing the book, and my best friend was in France, and she called me and said, "Chris, if you've got the miles, I've got the hotels, come over and join me. Let's spend 2 weeks together." And I knew at that point I had kept back about a quarter size ashes of my dad's in a little plastic baggie. And I wanted to take the last little bit of his ashes and put them at the American Cemetery in Normandy. When I got there, I had no idea what I was going to do with them, because those of you who've been there just know how overwhelming it is when you come out and you see all these crosses. And it was a very windy, rainy day. And I thought, what was I thinking? Was I going to put him on the grass? Was I going to put him on somebody's cross? And then I saw these trees over on the edge of the cliff, and I realized I knew where I was going to put him. So I climbed up as high as I could. It was about 8 feet up in a tree, and I found a branch that had a hole where it met the trunk of the tree. And I took the baggie out of my back pocket, opened it with my teeth, and put the last little bit of his ashes up in the tree. And when I came down from the tree in the rain and the wind, my feet hit the ground, and I didn't know ahead of time, but the American Cemetery plays our American national anthem every day at closing at 6 o'clock. So the carillon bells started up the national anthem right at that point. I was already emotional. And a French groundskeeper came up in a plastic covered golf cart and jumped out in the rain and said, "Madame, do you have a relative here?" And he pointed at the crosses. And I said, in my very broken French, "Non, mon père was an aviator in World War II." And this guy got down on his knees in the rain and held my hands and looked up at me and said, "Thank you. Thank you. We never forget." Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So he took me back out to the parking lot where my best friend was waiting in the car. Next. Then the next day we went to Mont Saint-Michel, which my dad had told me was one of his very favorite places on earth. I had to see it. And it was a very, very windy day. No rain that day, but wind blowing from west to east. And then in 2008, they hadn't built the new causeway that you walk over now, but there was a very narrow road with a low stone wall along either side of it. And we walked from the parking lot across in the howling wind to get to Mont Saint-Michel, and I became aware of the fact that my shoelace was coming undone. So I grabbed my friend Judy and said, "Hang on," and I put my foot up on the low stone wall and bent over to tie my shoe. And as I did, I was aware out of the corner of my eye of this little plastic baggie coming out of my back pocket. And it had the last dusting of my dad's ashes in it that I wanted to take home. And I reached for it like that, and I missed it by about an inch. I was yelling, no, no, no. And my friend said, Chris, wait, look. And we stood there and we watched. We watched the last little bit of my dad's ashes taking off across the beaches of Normandy from west to east until he disappeared. And I knew in that moment exactly who was in charge of his final flight. Since then, the book came out. Next. A number of wonderful things have happened since then, including this gorgeous statue made by Jim Nance. This is the clay model of it. It's 7 feet tall and in bronze. Next. Here it is still in the foundry. I helped Jim with all the details that you can see, his watch and his ring. I have that knife that's in his flight suit right there. And it was installed at the Air Force Academy, right inside the North Gate in October of 2021. Next. This is the small version of it, which sits behind me right there, one of them. And the large size of these busts are in a few museums. Next. This is the day of that it was installed and unveiled, and my daughter and I, with a huge crowd of wonderful people there to attend the unveiling. Next. And it is absolutely a beautiful exhibit. It's the Air Combat Warrior Garden at the Air Force Academy, open to the public. You just go in the front gate, tell the guard at the gate that you want to go to the Combat Warrior Garden right there, and it's just to the left once you get in the gate. And then this next shot is one of my favorites. It's dawn. He's standing facing his mountains. And Jim Nance also created this beautiful F-4 flying behind him. So it has been my honor, such an honor, to capture my dad's story the best way I could for his sake in the book Fighter Pilot. And all along when I was writing it and promoting it in the early years, it came out in 2010, I was so proud and satisfied that I had given my dad the gift of his legacy being more public. But what I didn't even know until I started really traveling the world, where I was invited to speak, is that he gave me the gift of the Air Force family, the gift of aviation people, the gift of wonderful museums around the world, of wonderful pilots who fly I'm part of the Warbirds of America, who fly these old warbirds, the gift of the people who love the pilots who fly the warbirds, the gift of a family. Wherever I go now and wherever my daughter goes, we are just so welcomed and so loved. And so my dad, who gave me life in the beginning and was an absolutely wonderful father, has given me a whole new life and a whole new excitement about what lies ahead for me. And it's also enabled me to turn back to art quite a bit. I just completed this drawing of him next, which is now I have a limited edition of 100. This is a 16 by 20 that I completed last October. If anyone's interested in it, just send an email. I think they're going to put the email address in the chat.
Yeah, we will.
Or also send an email right to Spin at the Aviation Museum there. And I'm happy to describe to you what's available in the limited edition. So I just want to thank all of you for being a patient audience with me today. And I hope you've learned a little bit more about Robin Olds if you didn't know him before. There is a ton of information about him online. There's a ton of his interviews available on YouTube. Just go into YouTube and enter Robin Olds. He did a lot of speeches that were recorded. I mean, he's just wonderful to listen to. So just a terrific speaker. So I want to thank all of you for your interest in this today. And more than anything, your interest and your membership in the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, which is just such a phenomenal place. And I hope that you can involve your family and friends as much as possible in the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, and also talk about the history of our Air Force. It's quite an astonishing group of young and old and retired and current active duty and officers and enlisted, and the whole gamut of these wonderful people. And I can promise you, with all my traveling around the world and all my speeches at Air Force bases, that we are in very good hands. A lot of people wonder how it's happening in the military now. There's a lot of questions about whether it's the same old military. It's better. I can promise you, I've been with these kids. They're a proud and capable bunch of young fighter pilots, both men and women. So have faith in our Air Force, everyone. Have faith. We are in very good hands. Thank you very much. And
Well,
aloha.
aloha, and thank you so much, Christina, for taking this time to share your father with us. One of my personal heroes since I was a young boy, and just a beautiful time with you. Thank you so much. And to all our viewers, we will get to your questions through emails and answer all of them, because I know we're way over time right now. But thank you all so much for being with us and spending this time. It makes the program possible. Come visit us at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum here on Ford Island on Oahu. And until next time, aloha nui, loa, ahui ho.
Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Christina.